The writer who has never questioned whether their work is good enough is not someone I'd want to learn from. The writer who's never lied awake at night wondering if they got a scene right, or agonized over a word choice, or read their galley proofs with a knot in their stomach, that writer has either achieved a Zen-like peace that the rest of us can only envy, or they've not yet developed the critical awareness to recognize what they don't know. Your doubt, in other words, is not the enemy of your talent. It's the shadow cast by your growth. The brighter the light of your developing skill, the longer and darker that shadow becomes. And here's the part that nobody warns you about. It doesn't go away.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 478 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, it's going to be another solo one. I've run out of time. I haven't been able to edit the interviews I've done. It's just been an incredibly busy week, but I wanted to give you a bit of a treat. This episode is the first chapter from a book I've put together recently called Stark Realities. It's chapter 1. It's called The Pinocchio Problem, and it is about imposter syndrome, which I struggle with daily, and chances are you also struggle with it. I thought it would just be easier to read the chapter, less editing. I even did it in a single take, and I stumbled a couple times. I just left it as is because it was quicker and easier. And I do hope to get back a little bit of time. Next week is not as insane a week as this one was for me, just returning from a conference and a whole bunch of other obligations that I have on the plate. Specifically today, on Thursday, as I record this episode, I had numerous things I'll get to briefly in my personal update. But other than that, I'm going to roll a bumper, which is going to be the ad read, which is actually about the book Stark Realities, and then I'm going to get into the content as quickly as possible. This episode is brought to you by my forthcoming book, Stark Realities. Now, this book wasn't planned, like many fun projects I've written over the years. It just wasn't planned, it just happened. After close to 500 episodes of this podcast, after dozens of Substack essays, and over 30 years working in numerous roles within the writing, publishing, and bookselling industries, I realized that the lessons that I wanted most to share with writers didn't belong in any one particularly themed book or on one platform or one type of strategy. They were instead the ones underneath everything else. They were me wanting to talk about fear, about money, about contracts, about persistence. Things like why do we keep doing things when the math rarely adds up? Now, long-time listeners will know that every week on this show, I usually end with a reflection on what I've learned, either my own life or a conversation with a fantastic guest. Now, this book is kind of what 8 years of those reflections look like when they finally get stacked up all in a single book in one place, and I attempt to put them all together and draw together common themes. It's not a transcript of the episodes of my reflections, and it is not a how-to manual. It's mostly a mindset book. And it's mostly the kind of conversation I'd probably have with you. And I know I have had this kind of conversation with some of my awesome listeners, but the kind of conversation I want to have with you if we were sitting together at a conference or brewery or coffee shop or whatever, bookstore or library, and you asked me what you actually need to know about this business. I tried to put it all in there and tried to keep it to about 200 pages as well. The book is up for pre-order. It's going to be $8.99 US, and it's coming out July 14th, 2026. But it's going to be available to purchase directly from me for $4.99 US. Prior to that, after that, the price for direct purchase is going right up to what it's going to be on the retailers. But for my patrons or for my paid subscribers to my Substack, you'll be able to get it for $2.99. I'm figuring out how the mechanics of that will work. I'm pretty sure it can work out, but that's what it's going to be. And I'll have those links available, and they will be in the next, probably by the end of day on June 12th, 2026, they will be available at markleslie.ca/starkrealities. There. How's that for an ad hoc book, ad hoc ad read? All right, let's play the bumper and get into a personal update. Oh man, so StokerCon, so much more to talk about with StokerCon. I got some great feedback from people from that episode, and even from the corresponding Substack article that I did based on my reflections as well. I'll have a link to that in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. But or you can also follow me on Substack if you want to just get notified instantly. You do not have to be a paid subscriber to get access to those, because all of those articles are free for the first 4 weeks that I put them out. I will, of course, as I've been rolling them out to patrons, I've been rolling out the backlist, so patrons will always have access to the content. And I may be tempted to tweak them a little bit, because, you always do that with another draft, don't you? You're always constantly tweaking and editing. But in any case, I should also let my patrons know I just recorded something and sent it out to you. Did I do it last night? Yeah, I did it last night. So part of my personal update is I just delivered a keynote address to the graduating class from the Creative Writing and Publishing program at Sheridan College in Mississauga. And I had a hand as one of the professional advisors who helped set up this amazing program that teaches the craft and business of writing. So proud of the program and what they've done over the years, and the students who've come through the program, and all my amazing colleagues in the Canadian publishing and writing and book selling industry that were a part of putting this together. It was a true honor to get to speak to the class this morning. So what I thought I'd do is, while I was rehearsing my keynote yesterday, I just recorded myself, and patrons should already have seen that notification go out. So you can check that out. It's in the audio feed for my patrons, and also the video is available. Me standing at my bar with Meredith the cat sleeping in the chair behind me, the bookshelves and beer behind me, and even the little karaoke machine. And I'm not dressed up. I'm just in a t-shirt because it's bloody sweltering and hot here. But in any case, that's for my patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. I do want to do what I can to give back to you for giving to me for your support for this podcast. But so I did the keynote this morning, and then I've got to get this podcast episode done. But I also I'm going to see Matt Haig in Hamilton, Ontario. I've got tickets to go see Matt Haig as the author of The Midnight Library. And I'm going to see Matt on tour for The Midnight Train, I think it's called. New book. I don't know much about it. All I know is it's Matt Haig. It's so exciting. And so that means I'm going to be on the road back and forth again. Probably there's going to be like 4 hours driving today back and forth, which is why I didn't have the time to edit the interview. I've got some great interviews coming up, by the way. I can't wait to share them with you. And but that's for another episode. For right now, as his voice cracks, let me get into this episode, which is, again, single one-take read of chapter 1 from Stark Realities, just to give you a feel for, although if you're a listener or you've even read my books or even some of my posts and reflections, you kind of know what you're going to get from me. It's going to be a lot of sort of reflections and mindset, and that's potentially just the therapy I do for myself. But I figure if I'm doing it for myself, maybe there's other people out there that are going to benefit from it. But without further ado, let me roll that bumper and let me get to that content. The Pinocchio problem that us writers face. Chapter 1, The Pinocchio Problem, on imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and the myth of the real writer. Your imposter syndrome is not proof of your inadequacy. It may be the clearest evidence that you are engaged in something real. When most people think of Pinocchio, they think about the line, the nose that grows with every falsehood, and a cautionary tale about deception and its consequences. That's not part of the story that I want to talk about. The part that has always haunted me, and I mean haunted in the way that only something deeply personal can, is the wanting. Pinocchio walks, talks, thinks, and interacts with the world on his own terms. He goes on adventures. He makes choices, some of them terrible. By any functional measure, he is alive. And yet the one thing he wants more than anything else in the world is to be real. To stop being a puppet who merely resembles a boy and to become the genuine article. A fairy tells him to prove himself brave, truthful, and unselfish. And someday he'll get his wish. Someday he'll be a real boy. I think about that promise a lot. Because every writer I've ever met, every single one, from the debut author clutching their first printed out manuscript that they're hoping some brilliant agent or editor will want, to the international best-selling novelist who has earned millions, carries some version of Pinocchio's longing. They're doing the work. They're making the choices. They are, by any reasonable definition, writers. And yet somewhere inside them, a quiet voice insists that they haven't quite earned the title. That they're still a puppet, pretending to be the real thing. That voice has a clinical name. It's called imposter syndrome. And it's one of the most pervasive, most misunderstood, and most paradoxically encouraging things about the writing life. Let me say this plainly before we go any further. I suffer from imposter syndrome almost every day. I've been working in the book industry for more than 30 years. I have more than 40 published books to my name. I've built and managed publishing platforms used by hundreds of thousands of authors. I've shared stages and panels with some of the most accomplished writers in the world. Margaret Atwood, Michael Connelly, Alice Munro, Peter James, Brandon Sanderson, Jeffrey Deaver, Terry Follis, Kevin J. Anderson, Jonathan Mayberry, Joanna Penn, Jim Butcher, Hugh Howey, Stina Holmes, Christine Catherine Rush, and Dean Wesley Smith, just to name a few you might recognize. I have a Master's of Publishing degree. I host this weekly podcast that has run for more than 462 consecutive episodes without missing a single week. And I still wake up some mornings and think, who are you kidding, Mark? I still walk into conferences and feel like the person who somehow snuck past security. I still finish a manuscript and wonder if this is the one that will finally reveal me as the fraud I've been all along. I still read another author's brilliant paragraph and feel something drop in my stomach. A little gravity pull of certainty that I will never be that good. I'm telling you this, not because it makes me special. I'm telling you because it makes me ordinary. Because if you felt this way, if you're feeling it right now, listening to me saying this, wondering whether you even belong in the audience it's written for, then you and I have something fundamental in common. And so does Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou published an autobiography, poetry, and essays that redefined American literature. She received dozens of awards and more than 50 honorary degrees. She read her poetry at a presidential inauguration. And she once admitted that every time she finished a book, she thought people were finally going to discover that she had no idea what she was doing, that she'd been running a game on everyone and her time was up. Think about that for a moment. One of the most decorated, most widely respected writers of the 20th century spent her career looking over her shoulder, waiting to be unmasked. She wasn't alone in this. At a Thriller Fest panel in New York, a group of writers who collectively sold hundreds of millions of books and been translated into dozens of languages all confessed to the same persistent self-doubt. These weren't emerging writers still hoping for their break. These were people whose names appear on airport bookshelf spinners around the world. And every one of them admitted that some version of the Pinocchio problem follows them into every new project. The poet Charles Bukowski put it with characteristic bluntness. Bad writers tend to have the self-confidence, while the good ones tend to have self-doubt. There's a cutting irony in that observation, and it points towards something worth exploring. You've probably heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, even if you don't know it by name. It's a cognitive bias that researchers David Dunning and Justin Kruger identified, and it works like this. People with limited knowledge or ability in a given area tend to dramatically overestimate their competence. They don't know enough to know what they don't know, so they assume they've got it figured out. Meanwhile, and this is the part that matters for our purposes here, people with genuine expertise tend to underestimate themselves. They've learned enough to see how vast the landscape really is. They understand the gap between where they are and where mastery lives. And that awareness, which is actually a sign of depth and growth, feels like inadequacy. Let me repeat that again because it's important. The self-doubt you feel as a writer may be a direct consequence of how much you've learned. Your imposter syndrome is not a sign that you're falling behind. It might be evidence that you've pulled far enough ahead to see how much further the road goes. The writer who has never questioned whether their work is good enough is not someone I'd want to learn from. The writer who's never lied awake at night wondering if they got a scene right, or agonized over a word choice, or read their galley proofs with a knot in their stomach, that writer has either achieved a Zen-like peace that the rest of us can only envy, or they've not yet developed the critical awareness to recognize what they don't know. Your doubt, in other words, is not the enemy of your talent. It's the shadow cast by your growth. The brighter the light of your developing skill, the longer and darker that shadow becomes. And here's the part that nobody warns you about. It doesn't go away. You might think that if you could just hit a particular milestone, land an agent, get a publishing deal, see your book on a shelf, hit a bestseller list, win an award, the imposter feeling would dissolve. That you'd finally pass through the fairies test and feel real. It doesn't work that way. Every milestone moves the goalpost. You publish your first book and immediately feel like a fraud among authors who've published 10. You publish 10 books and feel small next to someone who's published 40. You sell thousands of copies and read about someone who sold millions. There's always a bigger room. And in every bigger room, the Pinocchio in your chest whispers that you don't belong there. Dr. Valerie Young, an internationally recognized expert on imposter syndrome, makes a point that I think is essential for us writers to understand. You simply cannot share your way out of this. Talking about imposter syndrome is valuable. It breaks the silence, it normalizes the experience, and it reminds you that you're not alone. But talking about it is not a cure in and of itself. It's a starting point. Deeper work involves changing the way you relate to self-doubt. Not eliminating it, because that's probably not possible for most creative people. Instead, the goal is to recognize it for what it is, a feeling, not a fact, and to stop allowing it to dictate your behavior. Over the years, between my own experience and the wisdom I've absorbed from experts like Dr. Young and from candid conversations with hundreds of authors, I've come to think of imposter syndrome management as a set of mental health habits rather than a one-time fix. A few of them have been particularly useful to me, and I want to share them with you. The first is the simplest and maybe the hardest. Separate what you feel from what is true. There will be days when you feel stupid, when your writing feels clumsy, when every sentence seems to land wrong. That feeling is real. But the conclusion your brain draws from it, that you are stupid, that your writing is worthless, that you have no business doing this, is not a fact. It's an interpretation. and interpretations can be challenged. The second is to develop a healthier relationship with failure. If you wrote a scene that doesn't work, that's not evidence that you're a fraud. It's evidence that you're engaged in a craft that requires revision. Every writer in history has produced bad pages. The ones who succeeded are the ones who rewrote those pages instead of interpreting them as proof of permanent inadequacy. The third is to pay attention to the story you tell yourself about your accomplishments. Many writers have a remarkable talent for discounting their own achievements. They finish a novel and immediately fixate on the next one they haven't started. They get a positive review and focus on the negative one. They reach a readership milestone and compare it unfavorably to someone else's bigger number. If you catch yourself doing this, I know I do, and you will because we all do it, try to pause long enough to acknowledge what you've actually done. You wrote a book. Most people who say they want to write a book will never do it. You did. That's not nothing. That's extraordinary. The fourth, and this comes directly from a talk that my good friend James A. Owen has given at Superstars Writing Seminars, is to resist the urge to perform modesty at the expense of honest self-assessment. Downplaying what you've accomplished might feel polite or safe, but it has a cost. It trains your brain to believe the diminished version. It also robs other writers of the inspiration they might take from your honesty about what you've achieved. As James has repeatedly reminded us, nobody was ever inspired to greatness by someone pretending to be less awesome than they actually are. I want to come back to something I touched on earlier because I think it's the most important reframe of all. Those voices of doubt, the ones that whisper you're not good enough, that question whether you belong, that replay your worst paragraphs on a loop at 2 a.m, are not signs that you're failing as a writer. They're signs that you care. They mean you're reaching beyond your comfort zone. They mean the stakes feel real to you, that the work matters to you, that you're invested in doing it well. Feeling like an imposter, paradoxically, often means you are still teachable. It means you haven't closed yourself off to growth. It means you're still hungry to learn, still willing to be surprised by what you don't know, still open to the possibility that tomorrow's writing might be better than today's. That is a strength. Maybe the most important one a writer can have. The writers who concern me are not the ones who doubt themselves. They're the ones who never do. The ones who have stopped asking whether their work could be better, who've stopped being curious about craft, who stopped feeling that electric nervousness that comes with putting something personal into the world. Those writers may have plenty of confidence, but they've lost touch with the vulnerability that makes writing meaningful. Let me tell you something that I wish someone had told me decades ago, back when I was a teenager collecting rejection slips and wondering if I'd ever be a real writer. There is no fairy. There's no test of bravery, truthfulness, and unselfishness that, once passed, transforms you from a wooden puppet into the genuine article. There's no magical threshold where the doubt evaporates and you finally feel like you've earned the right to call yourself a writer. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need a publishing deal, an agent, a certain number of sales, a degree, or a prize. If you write, you are a writer, full stop. The rest is marketing. I know that sounds simple. I know it might even sound glib, but I've spent more than 3 decades in this industry and I've watched far too many talented people talk themselves out of their own careers because they were waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel worthy, waiting for the moment when the imposter syndrome would release its grip and they could finally get on with the work. That moment doesn't come. The grip doesn't release. What happens, if you're lucky, is that you learn to write with the grip still on you. You learn that the doubt and the work can coexist. You learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. And you learn eventually that the Pinocchio problem was based on a false premise all along. You were never a puppet. You were always real. You just hadn't figured out how to believe it yet. So here's what I want you to do. The next time that voice shows up, the one that says you're faking it, that you don't belong, that everyone else in the room has something you lack, I want you to pause, take a breath, and consider the possibility that this voice is not your enemy delivering a verdict. It's your ambition reminding you that you're still growing. You are not an imposter. You are a writer who cares deeply about the quality of their work, and that care has a price. And that price is discomfort. Pay it gladly. It's one of the best investments you'll ever make. And then get back to writing. Because the world doesn't need you to feel ready. It just needs you to show up.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.